The afternoon sun baked the asphalt of the Los Angeles studio backlit, making the air shimmer with heat. Caleb juggled a cardboard lunchbox, the flimsy container already growing soft in his hands. He nudged open the door to the makeup trailer with his shoulder, a sliver of icy air conditioning escaping to greet him. It was accompanied by a wet, fervent sound that stopped him cold. On the worn vinyl couch just inside, a tangle of limbs resolved itself into two figures, Liam and Noah, the show's leads, locked in a kiss that seemed to defy the basic human need for oxygen. They appeared to sustain themselves purely on the exchange of saliva. With a mask of weary indifference, Caleb shut the door and pulled out his phone, his thumb tapping out a quick message to Dylan. He asked if he was in his motorhome. The reply came instantly. He was, and Caleb was welcome to come over. A wave of relief washed over him. He jogged toward the private parking area, the promise of a cool sanctuary spurring him on. He climbed the steps into Dylan's luxurious motorhome, the scent of fresh food hitting him immediately. The large table was covered with an impressive spread of artisanal sandwiches, a vibrant fruit salad, and bottles of sparkling water. Dylan was lounging on the sofa, looking up as Caleb entered. He gestured toward the food, mentioning that his aunt had packed extra today. Caleb feigned reluctance, suggesting it wouldn't be right before declaring that, to prevent such a terrible waste, he would selflessly help eliminate the surplus. His own sad-looking lunchbox was instantly forgotten. He settled onto the sofa opposite Dylan and launched into a familiar tirade, complaining about how intensely the two leads had been kissing, the frankly obscene sounds they were making, and the sheer audacity of it all. He wondered aloud if straight guys were an endangered species on this set. Dylan's lips quirked into a faint, knowing smile as he listened, merely encouraging Caleb to eat more. After demolishing a sizable portion of the food, Caleb flopped back onto the plush cushions, content. He mused about how nice it was to have air conditioning and how much he'd love to have his own motorhome one day. Dylan hesitated for a moment before offering to buy him one. Caleb sat up, suddenly serious, telling Dylan he shouldn't make such offers so freely. It was how people got taken advantage of. As he spoke, he met Dylan's sincere gaze. A hand, pale with long, elegant fingers, reached toward him. A gentle touch at the corner of his mouth made him freeze. Dylan had casually wiped away a stray crumb, his expression unreadable. He then cleaned his thumb with a napkin, his voice soft as he stated that he was only like this with Caleb. Caleb's brain stuttered. He was sure he'd misheard and tilted his head, asking what Dylan had said. Dylan just shook his head, saying it was nothing. He then asked if Caleb wanted to nap in the motorhome. Caleb had already made himself comfortable on the built-in bed, patting the mattress and affirming that Dylan was the best. When Dylan jokingly asked if he wanted company, Caleb mumbled a polite refusal. He was drifting in a hazy state between sleep and waking when a tickling sensation on his lips roused him. He licked them instinctively, his eyelids fluttering open. Dylan's handsome face was inches from his own. He asked what was wrong. Dylan's gaze darted away for a second, his voice sounding tight as he explained that Caleb had something on his mouth and he was just trying to wipe it away. Caleb murmured his thanks and closed his eyes again, a warm feeling spreading through his chest. He thought about how people always said the wealthy were aloof and unapproachable. Here was Dylan, a genuine Beverly Hills scion, wiping his mouth for him. What a genuinely good guy. The two main actors in this romance series were, in fact, a real-life couple. Caleb had figured that much out over the long summer he'd spent on set. As a film student at USC, he jumped at the chance when his friend Mike sent him the casting call. Mike had seemed hesitant, asking if he was sure he wanted to do this. Caleb had given a grand speech about being drawn to the script's profound core themes. Mike told him to cut the crap. Caleb admitted the pay was just too good to pass up. Mike had warned him that it was a slippery slope. Caleb had brushed it off, pointing out that his role was the straight best friend to one of the leads. It was hardly a compromising part, just a summer job with no real consequences. Mike had finally relented, on the condition that Caleb provide him with insider gossip on his favorite celebrity couple, a promise Caleb was happy to make. The rumor was that Liam, the actor playing the more assertive lead, had essentially funded the project as an elaborate way to woo Noah, his co-star. They had come up together on a reality singing competition, their palpable chemistry fueling a massive online fandom, of which Mike was a devoted member. During their first intimate scene, Caleb watched from the sidelines. Liam pinned Noah to the bed, their kisses lingering and intense. Even after the director yelled cut, they remained entwined, whispering to each other with their eyes locked in a charged gaze. The atmosphere was so thick with romance it made Caleb, the self-proclaimed straight man, break out in goosebumps. He glanced around uncomfortably, whispering to one of the makeup artists about the intensity of it all, questioning if such sacrifice was truly for art. She had given him a meaningful look and told him he'd get used to it. And she was right. Their constant playful banter and casual intimacy around the set made them seem less like coworkers and more like a seasoned couple. He reported his findings to Mike over the phone, confirming that they were absolutely the real deal. Mike's excited shriek nearly deafened him. Once calm, Mike had issued a solemn for Caleb to be careful. Caleb had been baffled, asking what he needed to be careful of. Mike's answer was simple: gay men. Caleb found the notion absurd. It wasn't as if gay men were attracted to every man they saw. He was so obviously, unequivocally straight. Who would possibly bother him? Mike had fallen silent for a moment before reminding him about the guys at school who had hit on him. Caleb argued that those were exceptions and Mike shouldn't stereotype. He couldn't possibly be some kind of irresistible incubus that everyone wanted. Mike had just scoffed, telling him to hold on to that thought. Dylan was a fellow supporting actor, also cast as a straight character. Caleb played a doctor friend, while Dylan portrayed the disapproving older brother of Noah's character, meant to be an obstacle to the romance. The first time Caleb saw him, Dylan was waiting between scenes, reclining on a canvas lounge chair with his eyes closed. He had a lean, graceful build and skin so fair it seemed almost translucent. His face was arrestingly beautiful with sharp, delicate features. But his brow was furrowed, and his lips looked pale, as if he were suffering from the oppressive heat. Caleb found it astonishing. Someone who looked like that was still stuck waiting around with the rest of them, playing a minor role. The injustice of seeing such a beautiful person suffer moved him. He hurried to a craft service table, grabbing a bottle of ice water and a red, white, and blue bomb pop. He pulled up a stool next to Dylan's chair. The sound made Dylan's eyes flutter open, and he watched Caleb with a quiet, curious gaze. Caleb decided this beautiful man must be shy. He held out the water and the popsicle, asking if he needed them. Dylan's eyes were filled with confusion. Caleb urged him not to be polite, pointing out that he looked like he was on the verge of heatstroke and needed to cool down. The man remained motionless, his expression unreadable. Such caution, Caleb thought. He unwrapped the popsicle and took a lick himself, announcing that it wasn't poisoned. He nonchalantly continued to eat it, his tongue tracing the melting stripes of color. Dylan's dark eyes seemed to deepen, his stare fixed on Caleb's mouth. Finally, he spoke, his voice a smooth, low tenor that perfectly matched his elegant appearance. He said, "Thank you. Caleb waved a hand dismissively, saying it was nothing. They were all just trying to make a living out here. He introduced himself as Caleb. Dylan took a small sip of water and said his name was Dylan. He then repeated Caleb's name, a small smile touching his lips as he thanked him again. It was no wonder Dylan was struggling with the heat. In the middle of the day, minor actors like them had nowhere to go. Caleb had discovered the air-conditioned makeup trailer was usually empty during the lunch break. He had just settled in with his food, a video queued up on his phone, when the door burst open. Two figures stumbled in, and Caleb, startled, instinctively dove under a vanity table. The door slammed shut, and the taller man immediately pressed the shorter one against it, kissing him deeply. A breathless voice, which Caleb recognized as Noah's, protested weakly. It was indeed Noah and Liam. Liam chuckled, reassuring him that he'd checked earlier and the room was always empty at this time. It used to be. Caleb fumed silently from his hiding spot. But not today. Didn't the main actors have their own private trailers? Why were they engaging in public displays in a shared space? He silently berated himself. Why had he hidden? Eating lunch wasn't a crime. But now, crouched under a table, he was the one who looked guilty. He heard Noah mention the smell of food. Liam dismissed it, suggesting someone had eaten in there earlier, and then steered Noah toward the small sofa in the back of the trailer. Caleb, clutching his lunchbox, watched them move away before he crept out the door and made a break for it. Later, in a quieter part of the lot, he saw Dylan walking beside the director, heading toward a sleek black motorhome. So Dylan had his own trailer. He was a secret trust fund kid. Caleb scurried over, greeting the director cheerfully before turning a bright smile on Dylan. Dylan, still in the dark suit from his scene, turned at the sound of his name. Caleb was struck again by his looks. He blurted out that Dylan's eyelashes were incredibly long and, on impulse, leaned in to inspect them, his breath mingling with the faint, clean scent coming off Dylan. Dylan's long lashes trembled, a hint of amusement in his eyes, but he didn't pull away. Caleb gave a lash a gentle tug to see if it was fake and announced with satisfaction that it was real. Dylan's expression remained placid as he asked if Caleb needed something. Caleb remembered his purpose, asking if he could hang out in Dylan's motorhome. Dylan studied him for a long moment before agreeing. The director, still standing by, was watching them with a burning intensity. Caleb asked if he wanted to come aboard too. The usually gruff director broke into a wide grin, declining and saying he wouldn't want to interrupt. He then mysteriously pressed a hotel room key card into Caleb's hand, telling him to hold on to it because it could be useful. He added that Caleb was a young man with a very bright future. Confused but pleased, Caleb followed Dylan, who turned suddenly, his expression unreadable. He asked why Caleb wanted to come into his trailer. Caleb replied that it was hot outside. Dylan pressed, asking if that was the only reason. Caleb, already positioning himself in front of an AC vent, wondered what other reason there could be. Dylan looked at him with an expression that was hard to decipher. He asked why Caleb wasn't asking him how he had a motorhome. Caleb winked knowingly, saying he got it. Dylan was a rich kid chasing his Hollywood dream. It was a classic trope. Based on his acting, it was clear that while Dylan wasn't the most talented, he was certainly earnest. It must be terrible, Caleb thought, to have to return home and inherit a fortune if you don't make it as an actor. He clapped Dylan on the shoulder encouragingly, telling the young master to keep up the good work. He could have sworn he heard Dylan mutter "idiot" under his breath. For some reason, the crew had started treating Caleb with an unusual degree of kindness. One day, after a take, He overheard two crew members talking as he was heading to the restroom. They were discussing him, saying he had latched onto someone important, and one of them whispered a question about whether Dylan was his sugar daddy. Caleb pushed the door open, frowning, and demanded they clarify what they meant. The two men stammered apologies and scurried away. The nerve of them, he thought, slandering Dylan like that. Dylan was just a nice guy. Besides, what could one man even do for another in that regard? The thought ignited a strange anger in him that didn't subside until he was under the icy spray of his hotel shower later that night. He shivered, realizing there was no hot water. He was already covered in soap. He suddenly remembered the key card from the director. It was for the room right next door. The director was a genius. It was coming in handy already. He wrapped a towel around his waist and crept out of his room, checking the empty hallway before swiping the card and slipping into the adjacent room. It was a suite much larger than his own. A suitcase lay open on the carpet. A cold hand suddenly clamped down on the back of his neck, shoving him against the wall as another hand patted him down. A sharp voice by his ear demanded to know who sent him. The voice was familiar. He struggled to look back and saw it was Dylan. He yelped out Dylan's name. The pressure on his neck vanished. Dylan raised an eyebrow, his surprise evident as he asked how Caleb got in. Caleb explained about the director giving him the key card, saying he had no idea it was Dylan's room. Dylan's gaze swept over his towel-clad form, his Adam's apple bobbing. He asked if Caleb made a habit of showing up in his room half-naked in the middle of the night, or if perhaps he had a penchant for exhibitionism. Caleb immediately denied it, explaining his room had no hot water. Dylan took a deep breath and stepped aside, gesturing toward the bathroom. Caleb thanked him profusely and dashed inside. Halfway through his shower, Dylan called his name. He quickly rinsed off and came out, asking what was up. Dylan was propped up in bed, a blanket pulled over his lap. His voice was husky as he explained that he also needed to shower, so he was just hurrying him along. But Dylan was already in pajamas. Why would he need another shower? Rich people were different, Caleb concluded, so meticulous about cleanliness. As he dried his hair, he told Dylan about the ridiculous rumor he'd overheard, that he was being kept by him. Dylan looked at him with interest and asked what happened next. Caleb said proudly that he had given them a piece of his mind. The idea was laughable. A white towel suddenly flew through the air and landed over his face. He looked at Dylan in confusion. Dylan, through gritted teeth, said he'd suddenly decided he didn't need a shower after all and asked Caleb to hang up the towel for him. Caleb obliged, then looked back at Dylan expectantly. Dylan just sighed and told him to get out. The door shut firmly behind him as he returned to his own room. He could tell Dylan was upset. The worries of the wealthy were truly mysterious. Noah's birthday celebration was held at a swanky restaurant, and Liam had ordered several bottles of top-shelf tequila. Caleb focused on eating, occasionally putting food on Dylan's plate. He ended up being coaxed into drinking a few shots. One of the actresses called his name. He was a bit dizzy but answered her question about why he was working all summer instead of traveling. He replied honestly that he was trying to save up money to get married someday. A sudden quiet fell over the table. Everyone's eyes kept darting between him and Dylan. Someone broke the silence with a joke, and the conversation resumed. The makeup artist leaned in and whispered to him that he wasn't being very discreet, talking about getting a wife. He didn't understand why that was an issue. He reached for the tequila bottle again, but a cool hand closed around his wrist. Dylan was staring at him, his expression dark. Caleb asked if he wanted a drink too. Dylan was silent for 2 beats before saying no, then pulled Caleb up and led him out of the restaurant. Caleb, unsteady on his feet, leaned heavily against him. When they got to the car, he climbed into the passenger seat. Dylan leaned over him to fasten the seatbelt, and Caleb was enveloped in a faint, pleasant scent. He instinctively grabbed Dylan's arm, him not to drink and drive. He leaned in closer, sniffing him like a puppy, and his lips accidentally brushed against Dylan's. He licked his own lips and grinned foolishly, declaring that Dylan smelled clean and was safe to drive. The man in front of him seemed to lose all patience. A kiss came down on him, hard and demanding. When it ended, Caleb was breathless. He murmured, confused, asking why Dylan was kissing him if he wasn't drunk. The air was thick with tension. Dylan gripped his chin, forcing him to meet his gaze. He asked why Caleb was trying to pull away, then sneered, asking if he was still so set on finding a wife. Caleb felt a surge of indignation. He was a man, of course he was going to find a wife. Dylan's eyes were terrifyingly dark. The seatbelt clicked into place. He gripped the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles were white. The city lights flickered across his face, stripping away his usual gentle facade. He let out a sharp, humorless laugh. He muttered a string of questions, his voice laced with resentment. Straight guy? Always flirting? Like to run around half-naked? Like to lick popsicles? He promised Caleb that later he'd get to lick all he wanted. When Caleb woke up, his mouth felt strange. He mentioned to Dylan, who was reading by the window, that his lips were a little sore. Dylan told him he'd bought him some popsicles last night to help him sober up. Caleb glanced at the trash can and saw several popsicle wrappers. Dylan frowned, his expression cool as he asked if Caleb remembered anything at all. Caleb rubbed his head, admitting that he'd blacked out. Underneath the wrappers was a piece of clothing. He picked it up and saw it was Dylan's expensive suit jacket, stained with vomit. He asked sheepishly if he was the one responsible. Dylan gave a curt nod. Caleb, mortified, offered to pay for the damages. Dylan's face hardened. He repeated the words back. A hotel in the morning and Caleb was offering him money? Caleb was confused. Dylan just said it was fine, the suit wasn't expensive, and told him to get to work before he was late. Caleb was touched. Dylan bought him snacks to sober him up and wouldn't even let him pay for the ruined suit. He was such a good person. Caleb gave him a thumbs up, declaring Dylan was like a brother to him. Back on set, a small lounge area had been set up for the supporting actors. When he went to the parking lot at lunch, Dylan's motorhome was gone. The makeup artist informed him that Dylan didn't have scenes every day. He wondered why Dylan had been coming to the set every day before. To observe and learn? What a dedicated actor. He got a copy of Dylan's schedule and returned to the lounge. On a day Dylan was scheduled to film, Caleb went to the makeup trailer early in the morning but couldn't find him. He asked the director, who was passing by, where Dylan was. The director looked at him with a strange, pitying expression and said, "Mister, Dylan wouldn't be coming in today." He asked if Caleb didn't know, wondering if he'd fallen out of favor so quickly. Caleb didn't understand. He asked where Dylan was now. The director said he was probably at the hotel and reminded Caleb that he had the key card, then hurried off. Caleb worried. An actor as responsible as Dylan wouldn't just miss a day of filming. Something must be wrong. He had no scenes that day, so he took a cab to the hotel. He knocked on Dylan's door for a long time with no answer. Murmuring apologies for the intrusion, he swiped the key card and let himself in. On the large bed, a lump under the white duvet was the only sign of life. Dylan was lying face down, his brow furrowed, beads of sweat on his forehead. Caleb gently touched his forehead and recoiled. He was burning up. He rushed to his own room for medicine, dissolved it in water, and let it cool before gently trying to wake Dylan. Dylan's eyes fluttered open, shimmering with fever. He obediently drank the medicine Caleb held for him but grimaced after one sip, complaining that it was bitter. He was acting like a child. Caleb searched his pockets and found a starburst, promising it to Dylan if he finished the medicine. Dylan, though displeased, drank the rest. Caleb unwrapped the candy and held it out. Dylan's soft tongue swept the candy from his fingers, leaving a damp, ticklish sensation. Satisfied, Dylan lay back down, then suddenly pulled Caleb down onto the bed with him. He hugged him tightly, as if he were a pillow, and murmured for him to sleep with him, with Dylan already asleep beside him. His breathing even and his expression peaceful, Caleb felt his own exhaustion from the early morning take over. The only sound was the hum of the air conditioner as he, too, fell asleep. When he opened his eyes again, Dylan was staring at him. He asked Caleb what he was doing there. Caleb reminded him that he'd brought him medicine and that Dylan had asked him to stay. Dylan countered, asking if that meant he had to actually sleep there. Caleb scratched his head, admitting he had been pretty tired. He then asked how Dylan was feeling and reached to check his forehead. Dylan flinched away, looking flustered, and said the fever was gone. He thanked him. Caleb stretched, saying it was no big deal. He asked why Dylan hadn't called his assistant. Dylan said his assistant was on leave. Caleb then asked about his family. Dylan's tone was matter-of-fact as he explained his parents were very busy and he rarely saw them. There was no sadness in his voice, but for some reason, Caleb felt a pang of sympathy. A poor little rich boy with no one to look after him, chasing his dream alone. Thanksgiving was just a couple of days away. He reached out and ruffled Dylan's hair, telling him not to worry, because he had him. He asked if Dylan wanted to come home with him for the holiday. Dylan stared at him, his voice quiet as he asked why Caleb would invite him. Caleb continued to play with his hair, explaining gently that he didn't want him to be alone. Dylan's eyes looked a little red, as if he were moved. He asked in what capacity he would be coming. Caleb beamed, a wide, toothy grin spreading across his face. As his best friend, of course. He declared that even though they'd only known each other for a few months, he already considered Dylan his best friend. Dylan was silent for a long time. Then he enunciated each word clearly. Idiot. Who wants to be your friend? He turned his back to Caleb. Caleb asked if that was a yes or a no. The muffled reply came, get lost. Dylan went with him anyway. Thanksgiving was a loud, happy affair, and Caleb's parents adored him. When they returned, it was time to shoot promotional material for the show. The creative director was trying to guide the actors, but under the bright lights, Liam and Noah were acting strangely awkward. Noah's face was beet red. The director sighed and suggested they shoot Caleb and Dylan's photos first. Caleb agreed enthusiastically. He was about to ask who was supposed to lift whom when he simply hoisted Dylan, who had been scrolling on his phone, over his shoulder. The studio fell silent. Dylan, his face a wooden mask, spoke his name through clenched teeth. Caleb spun around to show the director, asking if this was right. The director showed him a photo. It was a Princess Carrie. Caleb said he should have just said so. He then tried to shift Dylan from his shoulder to his arms midair. The director, forcing a smile, commented on Caleb's strength. Dylan, his voice a low growl, ordered Caleb to put him down. Caleb reluctantly set him on his feet and wrapped an arm around his waist to get into position. Dylan was now a good half head taller than him. His face was flushed, and he looked angry. As Caleb pulled his hand away, his fingers brushed against something hard and unmistakable. He instinctively looked down. He couldn't help but let out a surprised laugh, asking Dylan if he was into guys after all. Dylan's face grew even darker. He said, his voice low and menacing, "You're done." Then he turned and strode away. Caleb called after him, asking where he was going. Dylan's furious voice echoed back that he was done with the shoot. With his partner gone, Caleb sat down with the makeup artist, Sarah, and lamented the situation. Sarah just shrugged, saying it was fine if they didn't shoot. In fact, she had been surprised Dylan agreed to do it in the first place. Caleb didn't see what was so surprising. He had only asked Dylan once, and he'd agreed immediately. He fretted that Dylan shouldn't throw a tantrum like that, worrying he could get blacklisted. Sarah looked at him as if he had two heads. She told him that wouldn't happen. She asked who had told him Dylan was just some minor actor. He was the show's biggest investor. He could do whatever he wanted. The news hit Caleb like a ton of bricks. Dylan was the money? Sarah went on, explaining that half the cast was trying to get his attention, and some had even tried to get into his bed. She gave Caleb a disdainful look, wondering aloud what Dylan saw in him to make him the only successful one. Caleb protested that he had never tried to get into Dylan's bed. He then blurted out, his voice much too loud, "Dylan's gay?" Sarah shushed him, glancing around nervously. She asked how he didn't know. His mind flashed back to the director, who had been so friendly and accommodating with Dylan. He asked if the director was also trying to sleep with him. Sarah just stared at him, took a deep breath, and told him in a tone of forced sweetness that he must have gotten into a lot of fights growing up. Then she told him to go play somewhere else. His best friend was gay. To understand this new reality, Caleb borrowed Mike's login for a fanfiction website. He spent the entire night reading romance stories about men. His eyes were red the next morning, partly from lack of sleep and partly from the emotionally devastating love stories he'd consumed. Mike declared he had officially evolved into a shipper. He was a straight guy, but he supposed he could still be a shipper. With this new perspective, everyone on set started to look suspicious. He saw flirtation and seduction everywhere. He resolved to protect Dylan and his fortune from all these scheming men. One afternoon, he saw a young man with longish hair, edgy clothes, and an earring sitting next to Dylan, calling him bro in a soft, cloying way. Caleb's internal alarms went off. He marched over and squeezed himself between them, pointedly ignoring the other man's protest that he was blocking him. Dylan looked amused. He told the young man, Seven, that they would talk later. Seven shot Caleb a look before leaving. Dylan turned and pinched Caleb's cheek, asking what was on his mind. Caleb found himself staring at Dylan's lips. He remarked that they looked really soft, almost like they'd be nice to kiss. He immediately recoiled from the thought. Had the fanfiction corrupted him? He poked Dylan's lip, noting that he was wearing lip balm. Dylan just looked at him, unimpressed, and told him to get to the point. Caleb leaned in conspiratorially and whispered that he knew Dylan liked men. Dylan just said, "Oh." Caleb assured him he wouldn't judge him. Dylan playfully squeezed the back of his neck, and Caleb became aware of how close they were. He straightened up and voiced his new theory. Was Dylan trying to use the casting couch on him? Dylan leaned back, his gaze intense, and asked if Caleb liked men. Caleb quickly said he didn't, not really, but the idea was intriguing. He told Dylan that if he wanted to proposition him, he wouldn't necessarily say no. He had an adventurous spirit. Dylan closed his eyes. Caleb looked at him with wide, innocent eyes, asking what he thought. Dylan muttered his now familiar refrain, "Idiot. Get lost." Caleb slunk away, nursing his bruised ego. That was the second time Dylan had told him to get lost. It was a hurtful thing to say to a friend. The wrap party marked the end of filming. Dylan, uncharacteristically, had too much to drink. Caleb insisted on carrying him home. The weather had turned cool, and yellow leaves drifted down from the trees. One landed in Dylan's hair, and he blew it away. He spoke suddenly, his drunken voice soft and almost childlike. He said his heart was beating very fast. Caleb could feel the frantic rhythm against his own back. He guessed it was probably over 100 beats per minute and asked if Dylan was allergic to alcohol. Dylan said no. After a moment, he asked if it was tiring to carry him. Caleb boasted that he could squat over 100 pounds, so this was nothing. Silence fell again. When Caleb looked back, Dylan had his eyes closed, his head resting against Caleb's neck. To reassure him, Caleb made a solemn promise. He told Dylan that he was his friend, and even if they were the last two men on Earth, Caleb would never fall for him. He was completely safe. For some reason, this seemed to agitate Dylan. He asked why not if Caleb thought he wasn't good enough. Dylan then turned the question on him, asking if Caleb wanted him to like him. Anyone would want to be liked, but admitting it felt needy. Caleb stubbornly said he didn't. Dylan let out a soft laugh. A long, black limousine pulled up beside them. A middle-aged man in a suit got out and, after a moment of hesitation, addressed Dylan as young master. Dylan acknowledged him as Mr. Chin. The man helped a still unsteady Dylan into the car. A second car full of bodyguards followed as they pulled away. It was only then that Caleb registered the full picture. Dylan wasn't just rich. He was fantastically, absurdly wealthy. By the time the show aired, Caleb was swamped with final exams. He and Dylan hadn't been in much contact. The show was an instant hit, and online fandoms exploded, shipping every possible combination of characters. Caleb created a burner account on Twitter and joined a fan subreddit. The subreddit for his and Dylan's characters was already in the top 10, its banner a photo of Dylan carrying him from the promo shoot. He happily followed it. But right next to it was a subreddit for Liam and Dylan's characters. A surge of irrational anger filled him. He opened the streaming service and, during the live broadcast, began furiously typing comments from his main account, spamming the chat 100 times with Dylan and Caleb are the real ones. Before he was satisfied, he then looked at the clock and felt a wave of horror. His exam was in 9 hours. After pulling an all-nighter to cram, he crashed into a deep sleep post-exam. He woke up to a barrage of messages from Dylan. They were screenshots of his frantic comments from the live stream. Panicked, he messaged Dylan, asking how to fix it. Dylan replied instantly that the PR team had handled it, putting out a story that it was a dare. Then he asked why Caleb had posted them. Caleb decided to play dumb. The real reason was too childish to admit. A moment later, another message came from Dylan. Fine. I won't ask. See you this weekend. The fan event felt surreal. Dylan was there, looking impossibly handsome in a dark, tailored suit that highlighted his lean frame. After a Q&A session, the host asked the audience what else they wanted to see. A chant of "Kiss, Kiss" erupted from the crowd. Liam and Noah obliged with a sweet, public peck. Then all eyes turned to Caleb and Dylan. Dylan started to say maybe they should skip it, but Caleb was not about to be outdone. He stood on his toes and planted a firm kiss on Dylan's mouth. Their teeth clacked together, and Dylan frowned. Caleb, trying to smooth over the awkwardness, licked his lips. Dylan's eyes instantly changed. He cupped the back of Caleb's head and deepened the kiss, taking complete control. The crowd's screams were deafening. When it was over, Caleb buried his face in Dylan's neck, his whole body feeling like it was on fire. Later, in a quiet hallway backstage, Dylan cornered him, one hand braced against the wall by Caleb's head. His voice was a low growl as he asked what that kiss had meant. Caleb weakly offered the excuse that they were just promoting the show. Dylan's response was swift and cunning. Fine, he said, if it's all about promotion, he would go find Liam and promote the show with him. A knot of panic tightened in Caleb's chest. He blurted out that he couldn't do that. Liam and Noah were the official couple. Dylan shrugged, saying that scandal was still publicity. No, Caleb said without thinking. Dylan looked at him, a slow smile spreading across his face. He asked if that meant he was only allowed to have a showmance with Caleb. Caleb's mind raced. He pointed out that they had already kissed, and even slept in the same bed once. Dylan would get a reputation as a player. Dylan said it didn't matter. Gay guys were known for being messy anyway. Out of options, Caleb just stared at him with wide, pleading eyes. Dylan's expression softened. You're an idiot, he said, but he was trying to hide a smile. His hand moved to the back of Caleb's neck, gently squeezing. He whispered that if Caleb hated this, he should push him away. Then, a gentle kiss landed on his lips. Caleb's mind went blank, the only sound the frantic pounding of his own heart. When Dylan finally pulled back, he asked how it was. Caleb couldn't meet his eyes. Dylan's gaze drifted downward, and he raised an eyebrow in surprise, asking if Caleb was really a straight guy. Caleb thought hard. He mumbled that he was maybe a little bit gay. Just a little. Dylan's voice was low and indulgent as he asked if Caleb was done looking for a wife. Caleb's eyes darted around, figuring he'd read about all sorts of alternative relationship structures in those fanfictions. A male wife didn't seem so out of the question. Dylan let out a low laugh, the sound making his eyes crinkle beautifully. Caleb felt a blush creep up his neck. He asked shyly if this meant they could date. Dylan squeezed his earlobe and said of course they could. Caleb asked if Dylan was a virgin. Dylan's ears turned slightly red as he asked if Caleb had a thing about that. When Caleb just looked at him expectantly, he sighed and admitted he was. He then asked about Caleb. Caleb puffed out his chest proudly and declared that he was too, a 20-year-old virgin. The words echoed down the empty hall. Dylan covered his face with his hand. After their relationship went public in a carefully managed way, Dylan decided to quit acting. He didn't need the money, and Caleb wondered why he'd done the show in the first place. Dylan explained that the original novel was written by his younger cousin, Seven, the guy Caleb had jealously sized up on set. It was a massive, embarrassing misunderstanding. Caleb was now a devoted consumer of fanfiction about them. One night, he was reading a particularly angsty story and started crying. Dylan patiently handed him tissues. He enthusiastically recommended the story to Dylan, who picked up Caleb's tablet to read it. After a while, Dylan's voice, laced with meaning, drifted over to him. So this is what you're into? Before Caleb could ask what he meant, the room plunged into darkness, save for the small lamp on the nightstand. Dylan leaned over him, his lips finding Caleb's. As Dylan opened the nightstand drawer, Caleb finally understood. He asked shyly if they were going to do that. Dylan's eyes glittered in the dim light as he asked if Caleb wanted to. Caleb, feeling bold and ready, declared that he had watched countless videos and was prepared to make their first time perfect. His words were cut off by a deep kiss. Sometime near dawn, as he was finally drifting off to sleep, he felt a soft kiss on his forehead. A warm breath ghosted over his ear, and Dylan's voice, full of laughter and affection, whispered, "Caleb, I love you." The sensation tickled. Half asleep, Caleb instinctively swatted in the direction of the sound and mumbled, "I know. I love you too."